I have learned from my interactions with hundreds of my fellow Carolina staff members, I'm not alone. And I feel confident that I'd find that same passion, that same calling, were I to meet all 10,000 or so of Carolina's staff. Sure, there are some who are just here for the paycheck, but those are few and far between. Many of us go out of our way to do a little or a lot extra to make sure our students, our faculty, our visitors, administrators, and even our fellow staff have the best Carolina experience possible. And it shows. I've heard people gush about their experiences at Carolina, whether I'm here in North Carolina or I'm in Germany on a summer study abroad trip. And not a single one of those experiences would have been possible without staff. From facilities to finance, IT to research administration, from student development to student health and more. Staff make this university what it is. Staff make the Carolina magic happen. The groundskeepers and the folks in facilities working 12 to 14-hour shifts during the recent winter storms to shovel snow, plow parking lots, de-ice sidewalks, all to ensure students, faculty, and fellow staff could get back to the business of learning. Or in the case of this past Monday night, making sure visitors didn't slip on their way to and from our women's and men's basketball games. Go Heels, we won both games. The dining and housing staff who kept residents safe, warm, and well-fed, even though their own families may not have had power. The HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and other folks who ensured the heat, lights, and water stayed on in all kinds of weather this past year. The housekeepers and other staff who came in to campus during the height of Tropical Storm Chantal and cleaned up the mess that storm left behind. Some of it cleaned up before those of us that worked first shift came in. Our campus staff, our campus safety and police, who make sure we are as safe as possible and able to get home when we stupidly lock our keys in a closet after our coworkers have gone home for the day. That may or may not have been me. The staff who let students sit in their offices during a meltdown, provide tissues, resource referrals, hugs, and sometimes, or in my office always, a bit of chocolate. The IT and finance staff who very, very patiently explain for the 5,000th time, sometimes to the same person, how to set up the VPN or submit a travel request and concur without throwing the laptop. These are just a small fraction of the often unseen moments that make the Carolina magic happen. To each staff member making this magic happen, thank you. You are amazing. You are appreciated. You are seen for the unique and amazing person you are and the contributions you make. You are what makes Carolina, and I believe you belong here. And yet, despite the fact that we as staff make the magic happen, we are sometimes treated by the powers that be as second class. Our voices are ignored far too often. Those huge tables where decisions are made are oddly too small for staff to sit at. This might be normal, but it is not okay. During this time of lightning speed change, our voices must be heard, and we must have seats at the tables where these conversations are being had and where plans are being discussed. We love and respect our faculty and administrators, but so often things work for them and go smoothly because staff make it happen. Now, those same faculty are at the table, but they don't know what's behind the curtain. They don't see how it happens. They don't know how that Carolina magic happens. But that also means they should not be at the table alone. Decisions are being made without those necessary voices who can share what it really takes. There are so many examples of this, but I will share two, since I've already said a lot. First, area study centers. The decision to close these 6 centers and merge their essential functions within departments or a single center. But the people at the table were the faculty, directors, and administrators. Not a single center staff member was at the table until recently. No one at the table knew exactly what it takes to get a J1 scholar or H1B visa position filled. The staff, many of whom have been at the centers longer than any of the center's faculty, were not there. These are people who were recruited, sometimes from abroad, for their skills, their knowledge, to make sure these centers can operate and make them the national treasures that they are, yet their voices were excluded. This may be normal, but it is not okay. Second, and this will probably not surprise anyone, service first. This was imposed upon staff by surprise at a Board of Trustees meeting less than a year ago, after months of promises that a shared services model wasn't on the table. Since then, task forces have worked to create operating models for a new way of delivering HR, IT, marketing communications, research administration, and financial services. And while staff voices were at the table, 95% of them were upper-level managers and directors. Again, the people with the expertise about what it actually takes to get it done, and how one action in HR impacts 5 processes in IT and 3 in finances. Those voices were missing. In November, I nominated 4 boots-on-the-ground staff members per area who were willing to jump in and work with those task forces to ensure the operational models chosen were as strong as possible and unintended consequences were avoided. Sadly, but not surprisingly, those individuals were not invited to participate until this week. They were eager and still are to engage, but they weren't invited until after those models were identified. Add to that, only 2 of the 4 were invited to each of the task forces. Just 2. Who knows how the work really happens? Why? Because 4 would make the task forces too unwieldy, or so I was told. Let's call it what it is, an unwillingness to hear the truth, face the complexities, and spend the time it would actually take to create a meaningful service delivery model that doesn't overburden current staff who remain after attrition and layoffs. And let's face it, with the surprise resolution at the Board of Trustees January meeting requiring yet another $16.5 million in administrative cuts, there will be layoffs. And those are just 2 examples of dozens I could share where staff voices were not included. As Employee Forum Chair, I have the honor of being invited to attend the Faculty Council meetings. They are often a little spicier than our meetings, but not always. But that isn't the difference that most stands out. What most stands out to me is how university leadership prioritizes attendance at Faculty Council and how they speak so differently to faculty. For those who have never attended, let me share my observations. As I do, I want to be clear. I am not claiming there is intention in any of this. It is simply my observation. The most obvious difference is that the provost and the chancellor are at nearly every single meeting, not just one of them, as we have in the employee forum, both. And they are there for nearly a full hour of that meeting. We get to alternate between the 2 and hope a conflict doesn't arise that results in neither one attending. In December, I was incredibly grateful that Chancellor Roberts zoomed in while he was traveling. Let's just say the email I sent before all of that happened was a bit hotter than a summer day in July. Professional, but hot. I should not have had to beg or demand equal billing. But that is what happens when being treated as second class is the norm. The other difference is what is being said and how. Faculty are spoken to by campus leadership with a clear sense of respect. Their questions are heard and answered more thoroughly and directly. There is no playful, or what I would call rude, you don't need to tell me your name, I know who you are, when a faculty member follows the identical protocol of an employee forum delegate by starting with identifying themselves before asking their question or making their comment. We may be staff, but we aren't stupid. The disrespect we put up with in order to keep the peace and keep our jobs is not something a faculty member would tolerate. This is normal, but it is not okay. Many staff have as many or more educational credentials than faculty, and all of our work at a university, and all of us work at a university and live and breathe the same air and acronyms and policies and procedures. In fact, it is usually staff who explain those policies and procedures and concur and razor and connect Carolina to our faculty and administrators. If someone says something we don't understand, we are just down the hall from someone we can ask discreetly. We don't need them dumbed down for us in a meeting. It's normal, but it's not okay. In this time of incredible change and uncertainty, where so many things are not normal and not okay, I understand that some of these things are outside the control of the university and our administrators. So my ask of the campus leaders, both in this room and beyond, is that you consider taking action on what I have shared, what is normal but not okay. Give us equal time at our meetings. Speak to us respectfully. Don't dumb down your presentations and expect us not to notice or belittle us when we ask hard questions. Make it a priority to ensure staff voices at all levels and are at every single table where decisions are being made. I promise you, it might make your job a little harder at first, but what you end up with at the other end will be 10 times better and far more likely to succeed. As a professor emeritus of history said at the faculty council meeting last Friday, we are a university, we are not a business. Let me add to that. We staff are not widget makers, and this is definitely not a business, no matter what the folks at the Board of Trustees think. We staff are in the business, if you want to say it that way, of developing humans, of developing future leaders. And that is a messy, complicated, rewarding kind of work that is often hard to quantify. And most importantly, never forget that there is absolutely no Carolina magic without the passionate staff we are lucky to have. Please, please, please cultivate that passion instead of trying to extinguish it. My thanks to you all for, well, you didn't really have a choice, for listening, and I really appreciate all that you staff do. I'd like to now turn it over to Chancellor Lee Roberts for our Chancellor Roundtable. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
Do you need me to stand in a particular place?
Anywhere from the table over.
Good morning. Well, Rebecca, thank you. And thanks to all of you for having me here. For what it's worth, I was actually planning to say pretty much exactly what I said to faculty council last week. If there's any difference, it's just that I know you have a full-blown presentation on service first coming after this. And so I might talk about the context for service first, but you're going to get actually significantly more depth than we went into in the faculty council last week from Nate and from Scott. So first of all, I want to add my thanks to that of Rebecca, to everyone for their efforts during the 2 snow and ice storms that we've just gone through. Hopefully we've seen the end of the tough winter weather, but as you all know, I live in university housing, and so I've been here in the thick of it, watching how hard our teams have been working across the board: facilities, public safety, emergency management, dining, housing, student health, student affairs. It's really been an extraordinary effort to watch everybody come together and work hard under very difficult circumstances. So again, thank you very much from me and from the administration to everybody for their difficult work and important work. You know, Rebecca mentioned the 2 basketball games on that Monday night. On the previous day, that Sunday, was a women's tennis match. And I was texting back and forth with the athletics people. This was their biggest match of the year. So they were, our women's tennis team was ranked number 3 in the country, playing Georgia, ranked number 1. Georgia had beaten us in the national semifinal last year. And I was texting with the athletics folks, and they were saying, we're just not sure that we're going to be able to hold the match. And then they decided to try to make it happen. And I went over to the tennis center, which, as you all know, is not exactly right in the core of campus. It's tucked over behind the Friday Center, and our facilities team had cleared the entire parking lot, cleared the access road. The tennis match went off without a hitch. We had hundreds of people there at a time when most people in Chapel Hill were not leaving their houses and couldn't get anywhere. We were fully up and running, and that's all thanks to our dedicated staff and their hard work. And by the way, the Heels beat Georgia and are ranked number 1 in the country this week. So really a great example of what Rebecca was talking about, the passion and dedication of our staff to go above and beyond the call of duty, even in really difficult circumstances. I was going to talk briefly about, as I say, the context for Service First, why the trustees passed the resolution that they did. And I was going to talk about Carolina North as well, where we have, I think, some exciting news. So as Rebecca mentioned, we had the resolution from the Board of Trustees, 2 of them. One last summer asking for $70 million in cost reductions, and then the one at the meeting a couple of weeks ago asking for another 16.5, $17 million in cost reductions. And What the trustees are looking at is a forward revenue profile that's pretty uncertain. So when we look at our major sources of revenue, obviously, I think everyone knows the situation with federal research funding. There's a lot that's in flux. The budget that's been passed by the US Congress is better than we feared this time last year in terms of allocation to the federal agencies that provide most of our federal research funding, NIH and the National Science Foundation. Still a net cut for the National Science Foundation, although less than we feared. But the structure and process and priorities of federal research funding are very much in flux. And really, it's the largest change for those agencies in certainly in a generation, probably in the post-war period, not just for us, but for all major research universities. We also have, because we don't have a state budget, we don't have enrollment funding. And because that's funded in arrears, we don't have enrollment funding, not just for the current freshmen, but also for the current sophomores. So half of the undergraduate population has not yet been funded by the General Assembly. And the timing, whether we get that funding and what the timing will be, could not be more uncertain. Our tuition revenue, the Board of Trustees passed a tuition and fees increase. They passed the maximum allowable increase. The Board of Governors has not yet approved that increase, but the tuition is constrained as a revenue source for a couple of reasons, tuition and fees. One is that for resident tuition, 82% of our undergraduate population, we can only increase by 3% a year, and we're required to stay in the bottom quartile of our peer group, and current students are protected from any tuition increases. And so you're talking about a 3% increase, which takes 4 years to fully work its way through the student body. Resident tuition is just not much of a tool for generating more revenue. And when it comes to non-resident tuition, we are aggressively trying to bring tuition up to market rates. We believe we shouldn't raise non-resident tuition more than 10% a year, because those tuition increases flow through immediately to families, and we think hitting them with a greater than 10% increase each year is there's an upper limit to what we think is fair in terms of predictability for our out-of-state families. So we were committed to 10% increases to get up to the peer group level, and the peer group has raised tuition so aggressively during that 2-year period that we're going to need at least 10% increases to get our non-resident tuition up to the peer group level. As I say, we're committed to staying at market, but that's only 18% of our undergraduate population. And then with fees, they can only be raised by 3% a year across the board. We have the lowest fees in the system. We put in for the 3% increase, but all fees taken together can only increase by a total of 3%. We also have the performance funding, which, as a result of a decision taken by the system office at the end of last summer, is a net negative for Carolina. It effectively means that we're funding the performance pool for the rest of the UNC system. And we believe that were the General Assembly to pass a budget, we would be included in the sports gambling revenue, the tax revenue from legalization of sports gambling in the state, which currently excludes state and Carolina. Money is distributed to every other system school besides the two of us. We believe they're ready to change that. We thought that was going to happen when they would pass a budget, but they haven't, again, passed one yet. So when we look, and when the trustees look across that picture, every source of revenue is under threat, or in the case of something like performance funding, going the wrong way. And that's the context in which they asked us to find the cost savings inherent in Service First. And as I say, I know Nate and Scott are going to talk more about the implementation and where we are with the progress of that. We also announced at the trustee meeting moving ahead with the Carolina North project. I assume most of you are generally familiar with what we're talking about when we say Carolina North, but this is 800 acres that the university owns, a mile and a half from the intersection of Columbia and Franklin. And when we look at that asset that is owned by the people of North Carolina, we see three large forces coming together that we think Carolina North can help address. One is we're trying to increase enrollment as we've discussed with this group before. The state is growing very rapidly. We just got the data for 2025. We were the third fastest growing state, 145,000 people moving to North Carolina just last year. And so as in the context of our overall mission to serve the state and respond to the state as it continues to grow, we've announced 5,000 additional students over the next 10 years. We need a place to put those students, not just to house them, but also all the other infrastructure that's required for growing enrollment, whether that's housing or dining or parking or classroom space. At the same time, we have an increasing demand for STEM classes. So it used to be in the college that we were about a third between social sciences, humanities, and STEM. Now we're half STEM majors. That's without having an engineering school. Biology is the fastest growing major at Carolina. It's the second most popular major overall, the most popular in the college. You can teach English in the same classroom for 100 years, and we do. But you can't teach biology that way. You need to invest in new lab facilities, new classroom facilities, and that's even more true as we try to add engineering capabilities to respond to student demand and workforce demand. The third important factor is that, as everybody here knows, there is a terrible housing crunch in the town of Chapel Hill. It's increasingly difficult. It has been for a generation and getting worse all the time for working families to find a decent place to live in the town relatively close to where they work. And that's not just the town's problem, it's our problem. Most households in the town of Chapel Hill have a connection to the university one way or another. And you don't need me to tell you the commutes that people do to work here at Carolina. Every time I talk to a member of our team, I ask them where they drive in from, and I'm always surprised by the length of, I shouldn't be surprised anymore, I'm always struck by the length of the commutes that people do to work here. We have people driving 45, 60 minutes in, and it's because the town has gotten increasingly unaffordable over time. So a lot of universities have these constraints. They're trying to grow enrollment, they're trying to add modern lab and STEM facilities, and they're trying to do something about workforce housing, but most universities can't do anything about that because they're landlocked. We have these 800 acres that, after all, are owned by the people of the state of North Carolina, and we believe we have not just the opportunity, but really the responsibility to use that land to try to address these challenges. So we announced at the Board of Trustees meeting that we're putting out an RFQ for a master developer to help plan and program the site. That RFQ is going out on Monday. And we envision over time at Carolina North a full-blown campus, a live, work, play, learn, research, study environment with student housing, classroom space, lab space, research space, office space, and importantly, plenty of housing that is affordable housing, workforce housing available to our employees and to the town of Chapel Hill to try to address the serious constraint that we see across the board. We were at a breakfast yesterday with Habitat for Humanity and talking about this topic. You know, Habitat has done great work to try to increase the supply of lower income housing in the town, but their big project they just opened relatively recently took 18 years to get approved by the town of Chapel Hill. We're not going to address the significant affordable housing challenges that we have in the town with that kind of approval and permitting process. And so the great news about Carolina North is that in a relatively short period of time, we can bring significant additional housing online, not just for our students, as I say, but for working families who want to live in the town. We plan for 2,200 student beds in the first phase. That's going to be one of the first things that happens at Carolina North. And all of this fits together because the more students we have living in dorm rooms, living in student housing, that's fewer students who are out in the market competing with others for the relatively few affordable housing options in the town. But there will be plenty of housing. I can't tell you how much yet because we're not at that phase, but we have plenty of land and the ability to build plenty of housing, 250 acres in the first phase to help address the significant workforce housing challenge that we see in the town. That's the biggest public policy priority for the town. The mayor has made this the focal point of her time as mayor. She just got reelected unopposed. She's been a terrific partner in this regard and a huge priority for us as an employer and as a university. Say two other things very briefly about Carolina North, and then I'll look forward to your questions. But one is that there's been a lot of commentary about the forest and the trail network there at Carolina North. So that's not going anywhere. I enjoy those trails and the forest there as much as anybody. Carolina North Forest is a tremendous treasure, not just for the town of Chapel Hill, but for the entire Triangle region. The 250 acres that we plan to develop do not implicate the forest or the trail network. So that's going to stay. As I say, it's important not just for the people who are going to be living and working there, but for the entire region. The other important point is the connectivity of Carolina North, not just to this campus, but to the rest of the town. So the I-40 interchange there at the top of MLK is being widened and improved right now. And then very importantly, the town is going to run bus rapid transit back down MLK to Franklin Street. And then that route turns over here on Columbia and comes down right here into the medical center. And the town already has the first tranche of federal funding for that. It should be running by 2029, 2030 at the latest. And we've already done the stops for the bus rapid transit. There's one right in front of Carolina North. There's one right up here, catty corner from the Carolina Inn on our land. And that's going to dramatically improve connectivity, not just between here and Carolina North, but for the town of Chapel Hill generally. So sorry to go on a little bit long about that, but thought it was important context. And I look forward to answering whatever questions you all have. Thank you again for having me here.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Yes, Ellie?
Thanks, Chancellor Roberts. My name is Ellie Alexander. I'm the department manager for economics. Recently in the DTH, there was an article about how Beatty Hill will be transferred into undergraduate housing rather than graduate housing. We have quite a few graduate students who live in Beatty Hill. We have a lot of international graduate students, and that's a very useful and great place for them to live as they transition to being in the United States, some of them for the first time. So I'm just curious what resources the university will supply to the graduate students to make sure that they have housing that they feel comfortable, being in, and that they can consistently be there for perhaps the term of their graduate study at UNC.
Yeah, it's a great question. Graduate student housing is actually one of the biggest choke points that we have when we think about the housing needs for all the different kinds of people who we're bringing here to Chapel Hill. Undergraduates, they have a wide range of economic circumstances. they generally know they're going to be here for 4 years. Tenured faculty, they're more predictable. They want to buy a house in most cases. They want to put down roots, raise a family. Our staff often want to be here for the long term. They struggle finding a place in Chapel Hill. It's the grad students where it's a tough combination of relatively low economic resources, and they often don't know exactly how long they're going to be here. They don't know how long it's going to take to complete their program, whether they might be in the master's program and not know if they're going to get into the PhD program. I put junior faculty in the same category, and we don't really provide much, if any, housing for them now. Beatty Hill has been one of the few exceptions. And so the reason for the Beatty Hill decision, and Nate might have some additional thoughts about this, is that we have to provide housing for undergraduates as we grow. We've told students they have to live on campus their freshman year. And right now we have a limited stock of housing. We're trying to fix that, not just at Carolina North, but with the new dorm that's going to go where Jackson Hall is, and with the demolition of Parker and Teague dorms to put significantly more density there. But short term, it creates the challenge at Beatty Hill. Housing that is appropriate for grad students, either dedicated to grad students or priced and leases structured in such a way that they're highly appealing to grad students, is a premier focus of the Carolina North development. We know it's a significant need. I know that doesn't help the current graduate students in the short run, but as we think over the longer term, it's a primary focus of us as we think about the mix of housing at Carolina North. Nate, I don't know if there's anything more you'd say about Beatty Hill in particular.
Oh, hold it in. Okay. Sorry. Just to add to that, a couple points. One, timing is important here. So there wouldn't be any displacement or with Beatty Hill until 28. So we've got a little bit of lead time, to the Chancellor's point. We are actively working with the graduate school just to help make sure we can connect graduate students with inventory and supply in the local community. The other point that I think is important is just the ultimate goal and our intent is to double the amount of housing for graduate students. So once we're complete in Carolina North with more graduate student housing, we will actually double the number of beds, which I think will help us longer term. The harder point is just that transition time and that challenge. But we're trying to work with the graduate school to make sure we can manage that.
And I'll just follow up to say that most people in the college, at least, are currently admitting graduate students for next academic year. And most of those students will be actively looking for a place to live, and they won't want to move after a year. So I say this mostly to say, like, continuity is important for all of us and how we live. And so those resources, as they can be made available quickly, would be extremely helpful for the staff and the faculty that advise those graduate students.
Yes, sir. And then I've got Sarah Green, Jay Eubanks, and Elizabeth. Go ahead.
I just had a quick question. What do you guys consider affordable for, let's say, a 2-bedroom apartment, which is what's going to be at Carolina North?
Yeah, so we obviously haven't gotten to the point of actually pricing units. We're just putting out a master developer RFQ on Monday, as I say. But I'd say two things about it. First is that there's a formal definition of affordable housing, which is that it's affordable given what percentage of your income that you dedicate to housing if you make 80% of the average median income for the town. And there will certainly be a component of capital A affordable housing subject to that definition at Carolina North. But more broadly, I expect most of the housing to be what I think of as workforce housing. This is not going to be some gated community with large single family homes. There's going to be significant density there. And the huge advantage that we have is that we own the land free and clear, and we're not a business. So if we were a private sector developer, we would have to generate a certain return from the land, which would limit the options that we have for pricing housing, because it would all just flow backwards from the return that we needed to generate. We have to pay for the cost of developing the space, developing the units, but because we're not trying to hit a particular return target to satisfy third-party investors, we have significantly more flexibility on the affordability front. So I expect a wide mix of housing options that are going to meet multiple price points, all on the more affordable end of the spectrum.
Sarah Green? Online?
Yes, thanks, Rebecca. And thank you, Chancellor, for being here. My question, I think, speaks to kind of several points that were made, and to tie them all together in kind of a broader current picture. So if we have all of these financial limitations through the Board of Trustees, expectations of the Board of Governors, General Assembly not passing budgets, what made you and your team feel like now was the right time or an appropriate time to start on Carolina North? We have owned this property, as you said, free and clear, so for several years, and we are currently in the midst of reduction in force, service first changes and challenges. The highest, unemployment numbers just came out this week from the federal government, highest since, was it 2009? Like, this is a rough time financially. And so I'm just curious, given the stress and the strain on this community, why this choice was made right now.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And I actually meant to touch on this in my remarks, so thanks for the prompt. And I'd say even more broadly, one question I get asked all the time is, how can you spend money on X when you're cutting money somewhere else? And so I'd say a couple of things, and I'll bring it back to your question about Carolina North. So first of all, the funds that we spend generally are not fungible across different uses, and I think most people understand that. We can't take a philanthropic grant that's meant for one purpose and use it for something else. We can't take a federal research grant that's meant for one purpose and use it for something else. Most of our funds are restricted in their uses, and the most important restriction is the difference between recurring costs and non-recurring costs. So you can't really spend one-time money on recurring costs. The money that we're spending on Carolina North, for example, the planning costs there, that's one-time non-recurring money. We couldn't take that same money and use it for salaries, which are our most important recurring costs. But more broadly than that, I do reject the idea that if you're spending money somewhere, you have to be spending money everywhere. We don't have a giant switch in South Building that says spend more, spend less. We have a tremendously complicated organization, and the world is changing around us very rapidly, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. And as that continues to be the case, I think we're always going to be investing in some areas and retrenching in others. I expect that to continue for the foreseeable future. With respect to Carolina North in particular, and why now, you're right. It's been almost 20 years since the university first started talking about this. They were ready to go at the time when the global financial crisis hit, and decided then that it wasn't the right time, and that they needed to pause. And that was now, as I say, almost 20 years ago. I think given the challenges that Carolina North can help us address, the ones that I went through about needing the space to increase enrollment and provide more STEM space and address the challenges of affordable housing in the town, I really feel as though the question should be, what has taken you so long? And again, we own this asset on behalf of the people of North Carolina. I think we have a responsibility to develop it on their behalf to address these significant challenges that we face. We're spending relatively little one-time money. The Board of Trustees authorized $8 million to spend on this planning and development effort. And then we expect to do most of the build out through a series of public-private partnerships where we don't spend very much of our own capital, where we partner with private sector developers using the fact that we own the land free and clear to get most of the project built. So if you take housing as an example, student housing, a common structure would be to either ground lease the land to a student housing developer or to partner with a student housing developer in a joint venture structure where we contribute the land into a joint venture and they build the units. In either case, we're not putting more of our own capital to work. We're just contributing the land. So it's actually a pretty cost-effective way of solving some significant long-term strategic challenges for the university and for the town.
All right, we've got time for 2 more questions because we're running a little behind schedule. Totally my fault. Jay Eubanks online, and then Elizabeth. Cannot hear you, Jay. You're not muted, but I can't hear you. While you fix your audio, I'm going to have Elizabeth ask her question.
You hear me now?
Oh, I can, yes.
Thank you. Sorry. The hazards of going back and forth from home to office. I get frustrated that the lack of a state budget seems to be just accepted as what can we do? And I don't understand why there can't be more of an outward facing engagement by faculty, staff, leadership, students, parents about what this actually means. I would suspect most parents of students have no clue what not having a state budget actually means to their child in Chapel Hill or elsewhere. And I don't understand when we're not in a divided government in terms of creating a budget and passing a budget, why we just throw our hands up and say, oh, well.
Well, I certainly share your frustration. We're the only state right now that has not passed a budget for the current fiscal year, the only one out of 50. And it's not just students at Chapel Hill, as you say, it's the entire UNC system that hasn't received enrollment funding. And most schools in the UNC system are even more dependent on enrollment funding than we are. It's important to us, but we're more diversified in terms of our revenue profile. And it's not just the UNC system that hasn't been funded. As a result of not having a budget, we don't have legislative salary increases. We don't have all kinds of priorities funded. And I share your frustration. It's immensely important to us as an institution, and it's important to us as a state. It is a little bit above my pay grade, and I hope they resolve it soon. We've certainly been making the case as aggressively as we can for the importance of enrollment funding to us, as well as some of these other legislative priorities, like including us in the sports gambling revenue. And we're going to continue to do that through every channel that we have. And I don't think it hurts for people to get in touch with their elected representatives and reinforce the importance.
And then Elizabeth, and then we'll have to wrap it up because I know you have someplace to be, and we have Nate Knuffman next. Yes.
I'd like a brief response to this in the form of saying we will form a committee to discuss this. I am too old to listen to, we don't have enough money because we don't get money from gambling. I come from the Dean Smith era. I find that to be really questionable, but let's move on. I am really glad that as often as this forum has discussed affordable housing and commutes, and that's even before COVID, that this is a response. And I believe in you've got to put money into something to solve it and partner with private sources. Let's put it that way. But I've also lived here long enough to wonder the following. If Carolina North architects and constructors and advocates have met with Habitat for Humanity, how will we find out what goals were discussed and that they will be achieved? If this is affordable housing, how much of it is affordable housing and at what threshold? And does it completely exclude people who are way below the income level you described, who are the ones we need most on site when things like snow and sports and security are happening? So those are two of my questions. But I'd also like to know, through the work of an employee forum committee that will work to make this more transparent, who are we in bed with? I'm appreciating that, unfortunately, it's too close to habitat trails for me, but the Horace Williams Airport has sat there dormant long enough, and it is a good resource, and it can be a good location. But who owns the units that are going to be built after they're built? Who is our money going to enrich through this? And I'm going to use the term enrich because they wouldn't do it if they weren't getting something out of it. So I'm not being cagey or critical about that. But who are we forming long-term financially beneficial partnerships with? And in what ways, and who gets included? If you've lived here long enough, you know that when affordable housing units are included in a design, it's not enough, they're not big enough, and there's rarely some sliding fee access.
Or they don't keep their promise.
Or they don't keep their promise, or it gets sold later on. We've seen decades of this. So I expect there will be some version of this now because that's always what happens. I'd like to suggest that we have some discussion, not today, of how we'll find out what is actually planned and what will actually happen, and hold people accountable to those plans, town and gown, and that we make sure that organizations like Habitat that are doing the hard work aren't being used to streamline or give legitimacy to something that will not result in what is needed. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I realize you were speaking a little bit more metaphorically, but just to clarify, we're not actually in bed with anybody. We haven't partnered with any other developers. As I say, we're just putting out the.
I apologize. I do use Hollywood language.
Well, no, I think what you meant though was you want to know as we go forward who we're going to be working with, and the answer is it'll be a number of different developers. But I should have said when I was talking about the Carolina North project that we are establishing now I think we call it the Stakeholder Advisory Committee on which we want broad representation, certainly from this group and from staff more broadly. So the three co-chairs of that committee are Anita Brown Graham, who's on the faculty, Aaron Nelson, who chairs the Chamber of Commerce and is also an alum and former student body president, and Brian Allen from the Board of Trustees. And we envision broad stakeholder representation on that committee, obviously including staff in general and the employee forum in particular. I'd also just say to your point about promises made on affordable housing in projects in the past, that's a little bit what I was referencing previously. So I happen to have a fair bit of previous professional experience in this area, and what normally happens with a private sector developer is they're buying a piece of land in the town or somewhere else. The town imposes an affordable housing requirement on them in exchange for the permitting, the entitlements to go ahead and build, and that's usually here in Chapel Hill 15%, at 80%, 15% of the units have to be at 80% of average median, annual median income of AMI. And so if you're a private sector developer, what you're incentivized to do is give the town the 15% and then charge as much as you possibly can for the other 85%. So you're asking 85% of your units to generate 100% of your revenues. And that's the model that Chapel Hill and a lot of other towns have evolved to in order to get some level of affordable housing in town. But that's what I meant when I said we're not bound by those same constraints, that because we're not a private developer who's trying to earn a return on the land, doesn't have a group of third-party investors or debt on the land, and therefore need to generate a certain level of return, we have significantly more flexibility to have a wide range of price points. So I think you'll see something very different than what you normally see with a private sector developer, where 15% is in this capital A affordable bucket, and the other 85% is priced as high as they can possibly price it. And we'll obviously continue to communicate as we go through the process, at which we are just at the very initial stages of.
I just wonder who will own it once it's built.
We really have not got, I'm not trying to be coy. We're just putting out the RFQ for a master developer who's going to plan the overall project, from which we will start then with individual parcels with individual developers down the road. As I say, I would envision a couple of different structures. A ground lease structure is one that's been commonly used in these situations, a joint venture structure. I don't see us outright selling land long-term to private developers. I don't think that's the best option for the university or for the state.
Thank you. What I meant is who gets paid the rent?
Who pays the rent?
Who receives the rent when people rent these units?
Well, it depends on the structure of the project. If you're in partnership with a developer, if you have a joint venture structure, a common structure would be you come up with the value of the land, say that's 50% of the overall value of the project. Just to make it simple, and you assume that the other 50% is what it costs to build the project, then you have a 50-50 joint venture, and the rents are received 50-50 between the university and the private developer. But again, that's just indicative and a little bit farther down the road. We're committed to plenty of consultation and input from this group specifically, as I say, but from staff generally. The workforce constraints that we're trying to address are predominantly staff constraints. And so it's not going to work unless we stay in close consultation with this group.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Have a
having
great
me.
day. Thank you. All right, let's move on to our next presenter, Nick Knuffman. If you'd like to come on down to the front, I'll bring up your PowerPoint. And you can just tell me when to shift your slides and I'll do that.
Thank you. Okay. Rebecca, I know we're behind too. Do you want me to
Just go ahead and do what
try
you
to
do.
it
Yeah,
quickly?
I can always cut out one of my pieces.
Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this morning to share some updates just from finance and operations. I want to touch on some of the budget work going on at the campus level, and then talk through a little bit on the facility side, master planning, and what's happening. Do want to start just noting, I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to this group. It's really important. We do it, I do it now every at least 2 months, sometimes even monthly. I know Scott Savage comes, he's been on the agenda a lot. Our division tries to be here. We're here more frequently than we are with the faculty council. I speak to the faculty council maybe once a year, maybe twice. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. We are here frequently with you all, and we appreciate that opportunity to do that. So on budget, next slide, please. The Chancellor already addressed some of this, but I do think it's helpful to start here. Just again, when we're talking about what's happening at the campus with financial management, we have to zoom out, think about the broader context. Chancellor mentioned it just continuing uncertainty on the federal level. I'll just note again, we're tracking closely what's happening with research dollars, either the funding levels for our funding agencies and that F&A renegotiation and how that is going to land in terms of changing what that percentage is and how it's allocated to campuses. So we're tracking that closely. The state level, again, the Chancellor mentioned some of this. Again, no budget. What did that mean for our campus? I think two big things, right? We didn't get any increases for salaries. We also didn't get enrollment funding. Really important. And when I say really important, it's a few $1,000,000 this past year. It's $15 million due to the campus this next year, recurring dollars. So those are really important bucket of dollars. Beyond just the state level, the system continues to have a lot of scrutiny on us in terms of administrative spending and just constraints on revenue. The Chancellor mentioned just the funding environment more generally, and I think of it this way. Research, a big source of revenue for the institution. If anything, our outlook shows a reduction or flat kind of moving forward. If you think about patient care and some of those areas, again, pretty tight, very volatile. It doesn't generate additional revenue for us to be able to invest into the institution. When we think about tuition and appropriation, again, we talked about appropriation not having or having some challenges at the state level attracting dollars. Tuition, we have constraints on those. The Chancellor mentioned some of the ability. We're as aggressive as we can be on non-residents. On residents, that 3% that the Chancellor mentioned, we were allowed to go up 3% on a fraction of our incoming resident undergrads, right? That's the bulk of our students here at the institution. That'll generate a little over $1 million for the institution. Our budget's $4.5 billion, right? So it is, to just put it in context again, it's small dollars in terms of revenue. So when we talk about those constraints and then uncertainty, you can see again that picture kind of moving forward. How do we want to position the institution to be able to continue to invest and to be prepared for uncertainty or cuts that might come our way? I think that's what's coloring, and that's what's I think impacting and influencing why the trustees moved this direction roughly a year ago. I think in March they asked us to really identify 70 million. Again, this past a few weeks ago, they increased a little bit in terms of administrative reductions, just another 16. Again, I think they're looking at that landscape, and I think that's influencing kind of what their expectations for us and where we need to be positioned. Next slide.
Thank you. There we go.
So I wanted to share this. This is the budget savings plan by area that we shared with the trustees, and we've shared across campus in different forums since last July. So we've done that, and again, a couple of key points. I think one, in putting this plan together, we really tried to protect our core operations as best possible. So we tried to really think about and protect our current employees. If you look at where those savings are coming from, more than half don't affect current employees in that list. So if you actually quantified the dollars and looked at that, I think that's an important point. Second, I think a lot of it's an effectiveness and just try to operate more efficiently. You see that theme, and of course, service first is part of that, and we'll talk some more about that, and Scott will expand on where we're at with that initiative. I also want to note centers and institutes. That's gotten a lot of attention recently, and I want to clarify. So first, that's been an area that we identified for a reduction since last July. We've updated to the board every board meeting since last July with that expectation with this chart. So that's not a new area or of expectation in terms of finding some savings at the institution. And why was that on there? Again, part of what was driving some of these things on there, we have to be mindful of where the legislature is thinking about finding reductions at the university. In the Senate budget this year, they identified low-performing programs, which is one of the areas, and centers and institutes, and had a really big dollar target cut in there, which would have translated to much higher dollar reduction here at the campus. I think we are trying to be aligned and get in front of that. And that's why you see, and that's why that's been on the list from that point in time. I shared with the board in November just the recommendations that I had received, that we had received in terms of where a work group had come forward with what the Centers Institute's reduction would look like on campus. You know, again, I know there's been some questions about what's happening in details. Those are probably best directed to Jim Dean and Jim White, just to see more about what's the details on how that's transpiring. And again, they're much more responsible for the implementation and execution of those pieces. Next slide. So a little update on the just where we're at in our budget process. We have been through, we've met with every unit on campus over the last couple of months. So it's been really productive, good discussions. It's interesting for me to just reflect on where we're at as a campus. You know, this is our 4th year going through an all funds budget process where we now, I think there's really a better ability for us to have really good discussions about resource needs, resource constraints, challenges, and just have a better discussion about how to manage the institution. So I've really been encouraged, and I'm very thankful for the campus community, just the amount of work put into this. I think it helps us. Those are the budget priorities that we kind of put through from the beginning: fiscal responsibility, renewal and expansion, ROI to the state, thinking about enrollment needs and other pieces there. And then obviously have to be mindful of what's happening on the research landscape. The big things we're really wrestling with are, how are we going to continue to move and support enrollment growth at the institution? I mean, there's obviously expenses associated with that. We have this goal of increasing 5,000 students over the next 10 years. That will put some burden on the institution. How do we make sure, from a budget allocation standpoint, that our resources are there to be able to support that adequately? You know, we all have other key priorities, and the Chancellor mentioned this. How can we be contracting in certain areas and then investing in others, right? Investing in other key priorities. How can we be pulling back on budget savings? This place is incredibly dynamic, right? This institution, the scale of it, $4.5 billion. There are pieces of the institution moving up and down at all times, right? Even in this budget process right now, there's a unit that is structurally out of balance, right? They've spent into their fund reserve, into the reserves, such that they don't have any more reserves. But by choice, right, we're either going to be pulling back, they're going to have to cut expenses to be able to continue to operate, or we're going to be putting in dollars, right, into that unit. Again, that's going to be going up, right, in dollars. We're doing that across the enterprise, even at bigger scale, right? That's just one small example. But I think it's just managing in this environment where you're going to have dollars kind of moving like that. So again, we need to be able to move our mission forward, invest in key priorities. Athletics continues to, the Chancellor mentioned the sports gambling money, how important that is. We have pressure on our athletics budget. That's real, and that's something that's going to be a big challenge as we move forward. Not just at UNC-Chapel Hill, across higher ed right now. And then a lot of the efficiency stuff. What are, you know, we have this $70 million that we're working toward. It's just been increased recently from the Board of Trustees. What does that mean for our budget? We're going to ask the Board of Trustees to approve our all funds budget here in March. How do those numbers get reflected in that budget? How far along are we in terms of being able to allocate that? We're not that far along, right? And most of that, so we can't allocate all of that. So how do we have that conversation, and how do we reflect that in our budget documents? We're wrestling with that too. So those are the big items we're kind of working through right now. I wanted to share a little bit with you on administrative spending. Why it's a topic of intense interest. Not just on our campus. Our Board of Trustees has asked about it, but beyond that, the system office continues to really look at this area across the UNC system, and certainly very closely here at Chapel Hill with what's happening. So this is the information I just shared with the trustees a couple weeks ago, so I wanted to share some of it with you. What you're looking at here is just how the system office pulls from our HR data mart, our administrative spending base. So what they define as administrative spending. And you can see roughly since fiscal year 19 to now to 25, 26, you can see that a couple things. One, you can see the growth, right? A lot of that is catch up from the pandemic. you can see that we really went into a hiring phase and we've spent more on administrative spending. Some of that's to be expected, right? But that's kind of catch up. What isn't shown on that chart is that slope kind of from 2021, 22 to 25 is really, if you looked back before 2020, that slope looks roughly similar. So I think that's missing from the chart and you can't see that. So some of it makes some sense. The other point I'd like to point out is just, we also recognize some of that growth and we have slowed some of the spend there. You see that we've actually accomplished some savings as we've started to look into this more and have leveled out some right now in terms of just trying to be responsive to that overall environment. So again, that's sort of where we're at.
Your button. Please.
Does the administrative spend also capture supplements for administrative pay to faculty?
It does not. It gets complicated in terms of trying to grab expenditures overall versus what's a snapshot from the HR data mart, and that's really we're using what the system office looks at. So that's why that data looks like. But I do want to put some context around this. So again, up some, right? If we go to the next slide. Part of the story.
There we go.
Part of the story is really we've had a lot of labor increases from the legislature, right? Mandated increase in salary. We've had over this time period, just in the last 4 or 5 years, we have had 13% in LSI or increases from the legislature. So again, what's happening? Yes, our salaries and overall spend on administration has gone up. Part of the driver is just keeping up with inflation and some of the increases from the legislature. The next slide. Part of the story is also what we do, right? Our credit hours are up over this time period. Our research awards are up. And even, when we think about what we do and what's different here at Carolina compared to the rest of the system, we have a large clinical operation, right? And so patient services are up a lot. So put it in context, you can see our head count kind of percentages against those things. A big part of this is some of our drivers, right? So again, I shared this with the board just to put some context around what's happening with administrative spending. Again, it's an intense area of focus here. It's up. Some of it is to keep up with inflation. Some of it's because of our mission and what we're doing here and some of the drivers, right? If we go to the next slide, I say all of that, it doesn't mean there aren't opportunities to find some savings. When we've looked at the growth, really, and we've looked at by unit and where some of that growth occurred, it's in really some of our smaller academic units. You see the percentage in the dollars and the head count increases there. And that's why really, when we think about service first and where its focus is, we think it's well intended and well targeted in terms of being able to think about where we can find some additional savings there. And again, I want to put even the savings target for service first, just in context more broadly. Originally as intended, it was going to generate, roughly $8 million of savings. We've already accomplished close to that just in attrition at the institution. And if we think about that in the context of what we have for spending pressure, it's about half of what we have just in enrollment funding needs at the institution that haven't been funded. So again, we were trying to put some of that context around where we're at, how we're trying to approach this, how we're trying to be responsive to some of these pressures, also give some context and considerations around why those numbers look the way they do. I think, at the end of that kind of conversation, we did get some additional direction from the board. If we go to the next slide, I think you can see, again, against kind of some of that background, I think is where some of this additional need to find savings there is coming from. So the board has asked us to find $25 million, but importantly, plans identified by June 30 this year. They've asked us to have service first be the primary mechanism to accomplish that. And again, they noted that again, we've been stressing from the beginning about using attrition as much as possible and involuntary separations being a last resort. They did mention implementing return to work for subsets of employees as something that we should pursue.
You return to office? Is that what return to work is?
Yeah,
Return to
yeah.
office?
Sorry,
Okay.
return to office.
Just a second.
Says, right, sorry. The, and the other thing they wanted to do, they noted that they wanted us to provide updates at each meeting. So that's kind of where they had left things. Sure.
I'm curious how is that related to a cost savings? Because I mean, there's a lot of people that were told they had to go work remotely because we didn't have space for them to work. So I guess I'm curious how making people come back to campus, perhaps that's not the roles and responsibilities they're thinking of. But that's one of the pluses of the hybrid work model.
It is, and I think you're touching on a great point, because it's not, we've actually achieved a fair amount of savings at the institution by rationalizing space, right? We've been able to drop some of our leases and been able to save some significant dollars by utilizing that. I think the idea there, I think for some, there's a belief that if there's a more on-work presence, that there may be more attrition, or there could be more attrition, and so you would see some of that. I think there probably is some version of that where there's a linkage between those two, and so you might see some savings. Again, how the university is approaching this is, I think this is important, is that we're trying to think about what makes sense. We've been revisiting, and I've mentioned this before to the campus community. We've been working through what it means we had a playbook for individual managers back in 2022. We've updated that. We're going through that. We're asking people to think about what the needs are of their individual units and operations on campus in current day, what that looks like, and try to think through what that means for an on-campus presence. We don't think it means everybody or across the board is the right answer. So we think if there's opportunities and we think it makes sense to have a more on-campus presence, we're going to look at those things. But again, we're trying to look at that in partnership with the campus. And we're doing it in the context of space utilization, because we've actually seen some savings. So again, that's where the campus is approaching this. Yes.
Yeah.
Good morning, Nate. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate the time that we've spent on the tuition and fees task forces and committees. And I did take away from your presentation today 2 words, efficiency and enterprise. And sometimes they don't always go hand in hand. And I will beg forgiveness of my ignorance, but when I saw the term patients, I could only think of the dental school that has an enterprise that sees patients in the same setting where it teaches students or learners, and related to, and I'm going somewhere with this, related to the service first recommendations. I'm concerned that there is a recommendation to consolidate some key services that we depend on. HR, finance, and IT are being considered for consolidation to serve 3 to 4 other professional schools. And again, I beg forgiveness if I'm missing something about the School of Pharmacy, but I'm not aware that patients come into their learning setting for services. And then the School of Medicine, those med students are getting their clinical training at a hospital that has its own services and can support them. But here at the dental school, we have a high demand for technical support, whether it's in simulation models, or whether it's in direct care of patients. So I'm concerned about long-term or even short-term, what that's going to look like for the school if we're required to not have hands-on real-time support in the areas of finance, HR, and most importantly, I feel like technical support, IT support.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I'm open to being educated, but that's where my concern lies, because we're a unique unit on campus, one of the largest, and we have one of the largest group of employees who are front-facing in their work and support of the student learner. So
yeah, No, I appreciate those comments. And I think you're touching on the biggest challenge with kind of how we're thinking about service first and any movement towards a shared service model, right? You have uniqueness across the campus. School of Dentistry, certainly. Other units on campus, there's unique elements. If you talk to any of them, I think you would feel and you would hear really, really strong arguments about what makes those individual units different. I think at the same time, we're balancing that against where we see some duplication in staffing levels and some similarity in terms of function and some opportunity to potentially see some savings. And we're talking about the dollar part. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we and Scott will talk about this in terms of work streams, but improving how we do what we do, being able to measure those service levels and being able to think about those things, I think is going to be a really big benefit down the road. That work's going to happen as well. We're obviously focused a little bit more on the financial components right now. But again, your point's a fair one. The hard work for us as a campus is trying to find that right balance. We're working through that. I think other campuses have gone to a much more centralized model, right? So what the feedback we're getting from consultants in the industry is people have tried this some. The models that are more successful have gone to actually a more centralized model. We're actually not there, right? We're somewhere in between right now in terms of how we're thinking about it. But we're trying to think about what that right balance is for this institution. And I think it's going to be a continued thing we're going to monitor and think through. So I appreciate your comments.
And I've got two hands up online, Sarah and then Shoshana.
Hi, thanks, Nate. This is just, I don't know that you've shared this number, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around what these numbers mean. Can you share what our current overall spending on administrative staff is so that we can understand what this 8 or 16.5 or 70 million actually means in terms of percentages of the budget? Like, what do we already spend on this population, regardless of how that looks compared to other institutions?
Great question. The base that the system office is looking at and what I showed earlier on that line chart is 530 million, roughly. So that's the administrative salary base that folks I think are pointing to. I think it's important though, when you all may appreciate this, I feel obligated to say this though. A lot of times people have an image of what administration means, and it may not be as expansive as what we're talking about here. I mean, when we say $530 million in spend, it's everything that operates this campus, right? You're talking our facilities staff, our legal counsel, our finance professionals, HR professionals, a variety of advisors. Those folks are all captured in that administrative number. So again, I think people have these images of what that is, and I don't think they appreciate kind of the complexity and the scale of our enterprise and what that captures. But I guess to follow your point, to put it in context, I guess if you thought about 25 million as the overall target, that's a little less than 5% of our $530 million base, of which we've already accomplished roughly a third of that through attrition, right? So just again, to put it in context, kind of what the target is and how that looks in terms of overall dollars.
Shoshana?
Yeah, hi, Mr. Knuffman. So I dropped this question in the chat, so I apologize if everybody's reading it twice, but if attrition can almost address the $8 million initial request for reduction in administrative costs, like how are we going to reach that much larger end goal? I heard you mention that involuntary separation is the last resort, but is that then leaving the university hoping that we're going to have a lot more voluntary separations? Because I feel like with a lot of the uncertainty and the sort of the decline in healthcare benefits and other benefits that the university leaves, that's what's going to be the end result. But I'm concerned that that's not in the university's long-term best interest. So how do we reach that much larger end goal?
It's a great question. That's what we're working through right now, is just how to think about meeting that target. And again, we've got to produce plans by June, end of June. We've done some good work with Service First, that'll have some foundation for us. But I think again, I think we're going to stay true to trying to accomplish as much of that as possible through attrition. We're going to have to think about, I've mentioned the number we've accomplished to date. There's a question on how much more could be accomplished through attrition, even between now and June. The challenge with that, though, is just attrition. That's not we can't be in a position where we're losing our strongest people, right? And attrition doesn't assure you that you are that the type of change in the workforce is one that's either strategic or managed and so there's a challenge with that, right? But that's going to continue to be the first level, and then that bucket, and then the residual we're going to continue to work through over the next several months with trying to identify a plan by June.
Yes, sir. Button. Don't forget your button. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Hannon. I represent the Grounds Department. I'm also the current president of the North Carolina branch of the Professional Grounds Management Society. Well, here we are, Nate. You promised our trailer to escape the heat of summer. That never materialized. You promised our trailer to escape the cold of winter. That didn't materialize. In fact, we just went through 2 back-to-back snow events, and yet our fellow coworkers were left without a decent facility to get out of the cold. We have a triple-wide trailer that's sitting at Carolina North. It's furnished and water was hooked up and installed, but the electricity was never turned on. Now, due to not having electricity, the pipes froze, then they thawed, and it flooded. With this happening, none of the entire department have any faith that there will be any progress to take care of us and give us the place that we deserve. With the official opening of the announcement of the Carolina North development to start in 2027, it's very clear to me and the entire staff that you and the upper administration do not value us. We have zero trust in you, and many of us, including myself, believe there was a deliberate decision made to deceive our department and make us think we were going to get what we deserved, a true permanent home for grounds. With the changing of the logo on the old well into the interlocking logo, it's clear where the priorities lie. The well is the reason the university is here. The fountain of knowledge has been left behind. Our staff works tirelessly to make this place special what it is. It's a magical place, and it should be treated as such. We all love being Tar Heels, but the administration is sucking the moral life out of this department. We deserve better, and you and the entire administration should be ashamed of how this has been allowed to happen. Until that trailer is either repaired, replaced, or a very clear decision is made on when and where we are going to be housed, I've decided to remove myself from this forum. You make it right, I'll be happy to return. To everyone in the room, keep fighting the good fight. Have a great day.
Thank you.
If I can respond to just we're frustrated too. We've been following up with State Construction Office. We're a public entity. We do not have 100% control in administration. The administration does not have 100% control to address these things. It is a priority for our administration. We've been working with State Construction Office. We're awaiting approval of the trailer. It is frustrating to us too. We're going to continue to prioritize that. Howard is very aware of that, and we are continuing to work toward that. Again, we are a public entity with regulatory bodies at the state level that we have to work through.
Thank you, Todd. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I actually just wanted to say that I work for the dental school and I wanted to address this
Yeah.
Our computer is going to restart in a little bit less than an hour. There's no way to,
We'll be out by then.
okay,
Yeah. We'll be
Okay.
there by 11:30.
thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Technology. I love it. Any other questions? Jenna?
Hi, I just want to make an ask. Is there not any place that our grounds people can come in from the weather and get a more reasonable working situation while the trailer is being fixed? That to me, I mean, if I had to work in the cold and the heat and have no place to go to warm up or cool down, it would be miserable. And I don't think anybody could work that way. Is there not a temporary solution for these hardworking people?
Well, first, I mean, that group deserves an incredible amount of I think thanks and appreciation from the university community. I mean, to deal with off hours, these snowstorms come, they don't come during business hours. The group works tirelessly and selflessly to make sure it's safe to inhabit the campus. And so I think they deserve a ton of credit. I do think we do provide some areas for that, but I would need to, and this is probably a conversation with Howard and team to go into more detail on what we're doing on the interim. But I can tell you that we have been working with the state construction office to try to get that situation resolved. We'll continue to do that, and I'd happy to have Howard come back and talk through in more detail just what we are doing for that group that's really important to our campus, and we genuinely appreciate all the efforts the group makes.
And how?
I mean, I for one would look at spaces in my building for people to just come in out of the weather. I think we would all pull together if we could just get some sort of temporary solution.
Yeah, Shane, I think we do have some space. I think this is kind of being misrepresented some there, but we can come back with some more information for you all on what that looks like. And I think Howard would be in a position to do that.
But at Carolina North, there really isn't a lot of other space, given the type of
right.
location it is.
But we have the Giles Horney area for, again, we could talk through where there are spaces, the adequacy of it, and the efforts we're doing to try to make sure we can get that approved by state construction.
And this may go to, something that I said at the beginning, which is, are members of the grounds crew part of these conversations? Because it seems very clear that they aren't. And so if the grounds folks don't know what's going on, I can understand Todd walking out of the room and stepping off the forum. So Howard is upper level. Who on the grounds team is involved in these conversations to know what's going on?
I don't know the answer to that. I do know that Howard's made a big push to try to actually improve the communication within the facilities division. I think it's a very large division. We have, but I know he's made a concerted effort to get together with different parts of the operation to be able to hear concerns and also address different components. So I do think he's making that effort. I'd be happy to circle back with Howard and describe more in detail to this group just who he's been working with and where there's been communication. And if there has been a communication breakdown, we can certainly work to try to address that. I mean, the goal is not to have folks in the dark about what we're trying to do or how we're trying to advocate to fix things.
Because I know this has come up on multiple occasions in the last year. Sarah?
I'll just say we've got some really creative problem solvers in the room, in the chat, but I also just want to really highlight that what I'm hearing is a focus on communication and planning. And when we have a major weather event, be that heat or cold, which we know is going to happen because we live in the Carolinas, it's too late to be planning, right? Like these people are in the literal cold right now. And I think we can all appreciate the amount of time and energy it takes to create an actual plan for something and The university has resources. To Shayna's point, there are buildings, at least one building on every part of campus has a spare room or a warm corridor. And would that look messy? Yes. Would that, though, demonstrate to this group that we care about their human rights, their safety? Like, this is sorry, I'm getting a little emotional, but it's easy to say from the comfort of a heated room that we are doing our best. And I'll just stop there.
Agreed. Any other questions? All right, Nate, did you have anything else for today?
No, I had some other stuff on facility stuff, but I can share that at an upcoming.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. My thanks to those who are patiently waiting for their turn on the agenda. And let's see, let me find the agenda. So Jessica Pages, I think I'm going to go ahead and if you will send me your updates, I will include that in my summary email. My apologies, but I definitely will get that information out to folks. Linc Butler, I think you are off the hook this time around. You are regularly with us. And so
Yeah,
I
we'll
want
be
to go
happy to
ahead
send, we'll be happy to send informational updates via email to make sure you have them. So
that'd be great. And I'll include that in the email as well. Thank you so much. All right, Scott Savage, go ahead and turn the mic over to you for a Service First update. And then we will move to our special presentation from Sustainable Carolina. Yes.
Good morning. Always good to be back at Employee Forum. Appreciate the invite as always. And if you've been tuned in since the beginning between Rebecca's initial comments and remarks and then the Chancellor and Nate, there's a lot of intermingling with Service First, right? And so my hope of coming to these monthly employee forums is kind of a checkpoint for the program to make sure that there is conversation, and then the material I've committed to over the course of my time with you all is to share what we have and where we are. I always do different meetings over the course of the month, and one dean asked me, Scott, do you have to bring slides to every presentation? And so I did not prepare slides today, because I wanted to make sure I had a really clear message of ongoing updates with Service First. We'll go through the website, because the cadence of the way things change over the course of just a week for Service First, I wanted to make sure that as we roll into 2026, that the questions that I get throughout the month, I'm going to keep referring to the website. Because there's been, in the goal of transparency, a lot of different slides shared, files shared, and that was really good to get us to where we are. But as we move forward over the course of the upcoming months in the implementation planning and ultimately into implementation, I just wanted to make sure at this employee forum, I was as clear as I could be that the use of the website for your ongoing observations, if you're in a leadership role or a staff role that's in a leadership position of peers, that this can be a really good initial location to go to for information. Simultaneously, I'm always committed to coming to meetings to represent Service First, whether that's general staff meetings at the unit level, leadership meetings at the unit level. Just please reach out and ask. The second thing I wanted to start with is just the task force membership of the employee forum members. When the employee forum originally asked for that in the late fall, it was one of those moments in time where if I could go back from the start of the task forces and embedding that more broadly, we would have done that. And the employee forum leadership's been great about submitting initial members and recommendations. If you remember the employee forum in December, I committed to posting the groupings document that was posted January 30th. I committed to doing that before the holidays. And as with many things, as we entered that last week of kind of December 18th and 19th, there was a large steering committee and all deans meeting around the groupings. And there was a lot of feedback. And so what I thought was more or less final as we were closing out the year, when we got back in 2026, the last 3 weeks in earnest, a lot of focus has been on the IT functional area and what would be that final operating model. So the delays of just that conversation, which I didn't anticipate in that first week of December, and then rolling into the new year, kind of had a cascading effect of honoring that task force request. But we're getting ahead of that. As we closed out last month, if you stay in tune to the website, you'll notice the groupings were posted, and then also the work streams that I've mentioned the last few employee forums. And a lot of the work right now for the task forces, the steering committee, and the work group are all focused on kind of 4 different work streams. The work stream that's been ongoing since mid-December is the HR evaluation. And so Linc Butler and his team have been working with the document that's posted around the shared groupings to evaluate current org structure, and then forthcoming having unit level discussions of what recommendations are there across each functional area. The first 2 functional areas that have kind of moved into that HR evaluation work stream is university communications and IT. The original hope in November and December was all 5 would start up together. Just bandwidth wise, that wasn't possible. And so as we get into mid-February, late February, we would hope that we could start having unit level discussions around those 2 functional areas. And then the HR team would spin into evaluating research administration and finance. And then after that, it would be the HR group is the current intent. That HR evaluation is really important because it would address a lot of the questions, statements that Rebecca opened with, but also questions that the Chancellor received and Nate received. And so my commitment is that HR evaluation, I know Linc is on every month as well, but as we get that material and the information that we can provide at a global level to this forum, we will. And then you all representing different units, the commitment to the deans and our vice chancellors of those areas is to have initial conversations with them and their designees. So that commitment since December of honoring the HR evaluation impact on units will in earnest start up in the latter part, hopefully, of this month. The task force membership, when all 4 were submitted, the process that we've tried to honor across each functional area is working with the experts in each of those areas of what's the right size of the task force. And so spinning into the launch of this year, the task forces were intended to focus on the other 3 or 4 other work streams. 1 was the KPI and value dashboard. 2 was process standardization. 3 is the customer experience. And then the 4th is workflow and technology enablement. And so what's been happening since the beginning of the year is the way we cascade this to keep it consistent is the steering committee is aware, the work group of all the task force leaders are aware this is the work stream we're focusing on and prepping them for that activity. And then they go to their task forces that have that activity. And then there's a feedback loop to get to ultimately for those 4 work streams, what is the service first recommendation for KPIs and metrics for a list of things in the process standardization world that we will be partnering with operational excellence on. And then for the workflow and technology enablement, what we've seen is every unit has a little bit of a different setup for systems used across each functional area. And so I'm really excited that we started working on this huge Gantt chart that shows every unit across all 5 functional areas and what current software solution you use to track work. from standard TDXs all the way to email or phone calls. And there are units that really still gravitate towards traditional conversations, phone calls, and email. And our hope is not to establish a required solution, but at a minimum, a recommended solution. So when you look at that workflow and technology enablement, that work stream, again, will follow that same kickoff process, right? Steering committee's aware, goes to the task forces, feedback, report out here. This will be one of the forums. And then we'll get to a final product for each of those other 4 work streams as the HR evaluation is ongoing. That material is all online in terms of operating model and then the current work streams. And then as we get updates on each work stream, with the KPI value dashboard being first, we'll push that out online in the end of month kind of publications. So I wanted to tie at least, my main goal today was just to use the website to push people to that, and then also give an update around where the task force request is, and then the effort that's ongoing across the 5 work streams that I mentioned. So I'll take questions. Please lead us.
Hi, thank you. I have a statement prepared, so I'm just going to read it, and I appreciate it.
Did that earlier.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank the forum for providing the opportunity to speak. My name is Amy Sigmund. I'm an alumni of the UNC School of Social Work, and I currently work at the Adams School of Dentistry in an administrative operations role. I'm going to try to keep my comments as brief as possible, as I recognize that my job is not technically classified as IT and communications, and that seems to be what Service First is wanting feedback on right this moment. But I do believe that my role is likely going to be irreparably impacted by phase 1 and other phases of Service First initiative. And again, I structured my comments based off of attending the listening session next week, but was invited to speak here. So I really appreciate it. First, I'd like to remind us all, and what a better day to do it than Give Kids a Smile Day, that the dental school operates a full-scale dental hospital, which sees nearly 100,000 patients per year. We not only share the mission of the university in education, research, and service, but we're responsible every day for the care of our patients. This care is sometimes emergent, life-altering, or life-saving. We employ surgeons, nurses, and healthcare staff who are highly specialized and hold the safety of our patients in their hands every day. And while I do appreciate Nate's comments regarding every school has their uniqueness, I would challenge that this is different. To answer the question posed for the listening session, in what ways has the communication I've received about the Service First transition shaped my expectations about the future of my role? I'd state that the communications have inspired fear and uncertainty. Based on what I've read and have come to understand, have reviewed on the website, Service First appears to have a public relations plan, but not an implementable initiative. I'm grateful that Service First is engaging with the forum, but based on the results of the mass survey that was distributed, I'm afraid that my invitation to this meeting today and possibly the expected listening session itself are a damage control plan, not a venue to actually enact change. The public might feel better after because we're able to speak, cry, walk out, etc. But Service First has failed to outline how the various feedback streams impact the operating model or the timeline itself. You're asking the general university to talk about phase 1, but have provided essentially no information on the website or otherwise when we can expect changes to our roles or what the changes might be. Months ago, I considered myself to be a hesitant supporter of the idea of shared services. Now I have no reason to believe anything other than my role as an operations director will be totally crippled by Service First because it threatens to rip away not only countless operating procedures and day-to-day norms of my work, but the relationships that I've carefully nurtured with my teammates over the course of years. I'm sure as leaders, you can appreciate that it's hard, if not totally unmanageable, to be efficient in any administrative role where you don't have strong working relationships with your colleagues. I'm going to skip ahead because I don't want to take up too much time. but I would like to provide a brief example of just what this looks like at the dental school. In my current role, one of my duties is to work hand in hand with clinic leadership, our communications team, and in-house IT team to let our patients know of any changes in our clinic operations. For example, during extreme weather, like our most recent snow and ice events, I helped to host meetings, sometimes after hours or from home, to ensure that we could let our patients know what was happening with their appointments the next day. Because I work in a model that allows me immediate responsive contact with all layers of our communication and IT team, we were able to get out messages via web, text, messages, our patient's record system, Epic, to let them know to stay home. Now I'd like you to imagine if my job remains, but my colleagues' roles are centralized under a hardly known supervisor who likely has no direct experience with patient contact, or the systems that we use, how would I make this happen? And the last message I'd like to carry forward is actually a question. Who will be responsible? Who will be responsible if in this winter weather scenario, the dental school patients didn't receive notice that their appointments were canceled and decided to drive upwards of an hour on a dangerous road to clinics anyway? Who would be responsible if a health affairs specific IT team was unfamiliar with our highly complex clinical student progress tracking dashboards and the entire framework for how the dental school advances students through our programs broke? Who would be responsible if our emergency medical plans weren't communicated clearly on our website and phone messages, and someone decided to delay care for an impacted or infected tooth because they couldn't navigate the steps to find urgent care? And who would be responsible if our medical imaging software went down mid-appointment and a health affairs university IT professional didn't know how to repair it? What if Epic went down and a medical charting process was impacted? Who then would be responsible if we unintentionally delayed care for a patient with an unidentified oral cancer? This sounds like a slippery slope, but for me and my colleagues, these are real questions. So I ask the Service First Steering Committee, Scott Savage, our interim provost, Jim Dean, our vice chancellor for finance and operations, Nate Knuffman, and our chief of staff, Christy Hurt, who would be responsible and held accountable for any number of possible negative outcomes of Service First when the initiative's leaders have seemingly neglected to take action on the incredibly clear feedback from the dental school that a university-based centralized model, in this case Service First, will likely not work for the provision of healthcare. Very much.
I knew since I was in the dentistry school, you were going to get some applause. So kudos to the team and
Everywhere.
thank you, Matt. We appreciate your voice. I think right now, from my perspective, who's responsible? Can I just kind of summarize? Because there was a lot of different layers of services you guys.
Yes, please do. And I acknowledge that there was a lot there.
Okay. And you know, in my background in healthcare myself, I understand the revenue generation, right? You know, in my world, my past world, a lot of that was medical benefit, which is kind of, you know, it overlaps a little bit with the dental benefit and the pharmacy benefit. But I also know the dental benefit from my own personal experience and just watching it as a leader at UNC Health for quite some time. It has a different challenge. And I can assure you, the dentistry school representatives in here, that your leadership team has been a voice of concern.
I know, and it seemingly has not impacted anything.
Yeah, and I can understand that perspective, right? And my commitment to even Dean Guthmiller and Matt O'Neill, who I think is here today, has been, you know, wherever the steering committee landed with the initial groupings, our commitment on the HR evaluation side, and I've said this each time I get asked this question, is that, you know, the evaluation that started in August within each of the functional areas was tied to activity level work. And then that group, each of those groups kind of stewarded what would be ideal to share, what should be centralized, and what should be unit level. And as Nate mentioned, there are cases for things that are going to be unit level. My commitment to the leaders on campus has been to foster that conversation. And so I 100% appreciate the uncertainty and the fear. And I know from my own personal perspective, that's the biggest challenge of this job. Because a lot of those are my colleagues from the past, right? And so my commitment to employee forum and all those concerns is it's going to take us time. And then my commitment to Dean Guthmiller was at the end of the day, if there was a sway of things that weren't unit level at the dentistry school that should be, and the steering committee went in the opposite way, we could always revisit it. Like that's the continuous quality improvement piece that's going to be a cornerstone of Service First.
So who's being held accountable?
I was going to get to the escalation. So right now, simplistically, the escalation for operational responsibility would fall to the groupings or activities that are deemed central and shared. There will be a different escalation structure for those activities, like we'll just use the dentistry school clinics, right? If that operation is deemed, hey, that needs to stay at the unit, then the goal of the HR evaluation is to make sure there is the FTE count that would still allow the ownership of what you all do. So in that case of what stays in the unit, it would still be the unit representatives or the groupings as they approach activities that are centralized or shared, it would fall to that leadership structure. And making sure, as you know, in your role, kind of picking up all the stuff and what I'm assuming elevates to you to Matt, having that similar kind of flow is what's intended with the groupings. And then also that same accountability with what right now are units that are in the self-service column. And then documenting that. And, the future state that I mentioned for Service First is reporting out on that. So when I say the KPI and value dashboard work stream, I'm really passionate about that. And it's not just process, right? The intent is to have domains of questions that truly measure quality service, finance, but then also student, staff, faculty experience.
I don't want to hold too much of the floor, but just from what I heard, it's sounding like we'll wait and see how it works. And if it doesn't work, that's really unfortunate for our patients. It sounds like it's based off of numbers, which I understand the HR evaluation. I understand the streams that you're speaking to, and it's not inherently a bad idea. I think you are failing to consider the overall environment.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I will say that, it's not based just off of financials from my perspective. There's 20 years of consulting companies on this campus talking about shared services. There's been 2 failed efforts, and a lot of that relates to the governance. What's happened over the last decade wasn't what it was 15 years ago. Nate and the Chancellor went into that. I think the environmental scan that we just refreshed across 15 of our peers it kind of echoes what Nate is saying, that moving to a shared services structure has become an imperative, not a requirement. And I know, being on this campus for a while, that any project or initiatives come along, the leaders, the decisions made, the groups, I'm hoping that there'll be a concerted effort to make it successful, right? And that's the piece of change is really uncertain. I appreciate that view, and I look forward to just the continuing engagement. That perspective is invaluable, not only for what goes on at the School of Dentistry, but all the other units as well. So I do appreciate your comments.
Thank you for committing to that.
And I've got a question online, and then Suze, I'd like you go next. The question online, I might need to rephrase this a little bit. Where did it disappear to? There it is. The shared services model does not detail how individual positions will be evaluated, changed and or cut. When can staff in IT and communications expect to hear more about those changes and potential layoffs, if any?
Well, in terms of, and I said this a few times, so the hope is that HR evaluations for those first 2 functional areas will be kind of complete as we get in the latter part of this month, early March. So that would go to the question of when will we have those conversations at the unit level. Right now, the plan, as I said, December 18th, with the dean's feedback, and the Vice Chancellor's feedback and now is that initial conversation for the HR evaluation is intended to happen with the unit leads and to get that first version of feedback. And we've committed to that since October. And so in terms of not having a top-down approach, that's not intended. Now, I'll be candid with you, the steering committee has been 110% supportive of that. And if that ever changes, like the approach for the HR evaluation changes, this will be one of the first groups we tell. I don't anticipate that unless there's some other ultimatum that comes out. But that right now, Rebecca, for those first two is the intent. The finance group and research administration in earnest, hopefully will be starting in the next few weeks, and then we'll close out with HR. It still fits in their original calendaring of events. If you think about what we had up to what I would call the end of the first quarter of 2026 was the implementation planning. And then I think as you alluded to for that April 1 to July 1, whatever's in the phase one. Phase one may have some HR shifts. I think the UCOM structure right now, it doesn't necessarily have a centralized push, but there are services in UCOM in certain units that will be centralized. And so having a similar conversation with each of the units around the UCOM is what Vice Chancellor Stoyer has already been having those discussions. So as I mentioned, to kick off, each functional area will kind of go at a little bit different pace, which feels clunky. But the end of the day, as we get into the third quarter of this year, there should be a much different approach to operations.
All right, Susie?
Hey there, this is Susie. I actually have a question. I would appreciate some clarification on how participation in the Service First Task Force was determined. I was actually one of the people asked to contribute to the boots on the ground capacity for Service First, and I valued the opportunity to share frontline feedback. Sadly, I learned today at this meeting that I did not get a seat at that table, which made me wonder what criteria were used to decide who ultimately had that seat of the Service First Functional Task Force. In full transparency, it's hard not to take it personally, especially since I'm just a simple IT analyst with no managerial roles or roles of authority and wasn't given the respect to have been told that I or some of my fellow employee forum nominees would not get a seat at this table. I'm not raising this challenge. I'm not, well, I'm not raising this concern or outcome or I feel it's imperative. Let me rephrase that. I feel it's imperative to have some employee forum representatives at this table. But I'm mentioning this to better understand whether the role level, authority level, or a managerial responsibility level played a part in this decision and how frontline perspectives are valued in these kind of initiatives. So clarity to help me understand that would be very valued.
Yeah, good question. And I'm assuming, Susie, when you mentioned your job code, you would be one of the submissions for IT? Okay.
I sure am. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of own that expectation miss, right? So, you know, the coming to the employee forum as that first task forces came out, one of the steering committee recommendations was to have, you know, operators over the functional areas kind of decide who they wanted in the task force. So we didn't put a lot of criteria in place other than it needed to represent campus. It's that first version of the task forces that started up in August was with that criteria. And then as employee forum gave that feedback, not only for some of the staff members that were on the task forces based off of where their pay grade was, it switched our approach to trying to get frontline staff involved. As I mentioned in my initial comments, the delays that kind of happened between December into January, we just got behind. And so the IT group in particular, where there was intent to start task force meetings again in January, they haven't met. And a lot of that is because the focus for Vice Chancellor Barker has been to address some of the requests that came up around the IT groupings. And if you remember some of the versions, there's an image I shared in December's employee forum, IT, there was only one self-service unit, and now there's more alignment with the other functional areas. So Susie, going back to your question, when we got into the month, my intent to deliver on Rebecca's request was to send communication of which task force members were selected. I didn't necessarily hear the request as all 4. I went back to the task force leaders and said, can we appoint 2 out of the 4 you all select? So we're going to revisit that today. We have a work group meeting at 1. And so I listened in, walking over to Rebecca's comments. And so my charge from here is to make sure, A, that I can give a clear reason on why it's 2 versus 4 at each task force area. And then, Susie, going to your example, is to send out communication that states when invites have happened. I think the HR, the 2 for HR have been invited, research administration selected 2, finance is selecting. So there are task forces that have been meeting and are starting to pull in those staff representatives. But that's one of my takeaways, Susie. I appreciate you bringing it up and then Rebecca's comments. But I will give feedback for that over the next week or 2 to Rebecca on where we stand. And then if we need to create another forum, which we talked about at some point, I know Courtney Alston, who's been working with me for a while, has a unique skill set, has been an employee staff member here. If we need to have a different forum, we can do that as well. So just opening up different avenues as we get the task forces rolling again in the coming months.
All the way in back. And I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Audrey, thank you. Audrey.
Oh, there's my button. I do not work in IT, but I work for the University Development Office, which is where we raise all the money for Carolina. And it's not really a question, more of a plea. Our IT department includes our customer relations management platform team. Our ability to receive gifts and manage donor data will collapse if we do not have the exact team of experts that we currently have, and we honestly probably need 5 to 10 more of them. Their expertise is not a transferable resource, and it is also not a resource that like someone who is a very skilled IT professional can learn. It takes several years to be onboarded on their team to be fully effective. Like, we have a giving day where we raise millions of dollars. If we don't have the exact IT team we have right now, that will collapse. Our giving pages on our website where someone goes to make a gift to athletics will collapse if we have the wrong people working on those projects. Like, there are some things that are simply not transferable that, like, even if you don't care personally, it matters to the university's ability to take money from alumni, constituents, friends, donors.
And I'm assuming that's Davey? Yeah. So, if I were to have answered the question originally from the dentistry school, 2 units who have unique software solutions that are addressing things that would most likely need to stay at the unit, your leadership group has reached out multiple times as well. And I was, definitely had awareness of that, but those would be examples, situations where the original planning intent of activities that could stay at the unit would warrant it. Right, so that due diligence is 110% intended for those activities.
So the buckets can change.
So the
buckets can change.
When you say buckets, you're referring to the groupings?
Yes, so there is possibility then that IT may not land exactly where it lands and that there's legitimate flexibility.
So it's dated January 23rd, 2026. I've got an Excel file that shows every version submitted. And so the steering committee has honored making changes. For what it's worth right now for the HR evaluation, I'm 99.9% sure that the version that's posted is what we're doing the evaluation with. And if part of that evaluation warrants changes to things, the steering committee, I think as Nate mentioned and Interim Provost Dean mentioned last month, they are listening. And then we'll change the dates. So that was the version control, because we were floating versions out there and people would be referring to past ones. And it was really more of a communication piece to help with the dean conversation. So that's how they're dated, if you're wondering why is it dated January 23rd.
Thank you.
Annetta, and then Teresa online.
Thanks again for the update on Service First. Back Amy spoke about the dental school's unique needs. We both used the examples, the service areas of HR and IT and finance. But in your response to her, you used an example of HR possibly being decentralized for our purposes, but as I did when I first made my comments, she also amplified that a real life situation where IT triage and support would be critical whenever we have an incident at the school or whether we have to respond to inclement weather. But you didn't respond to that scenario as a possibility where we could maintain our IT support. You used the example of HR potentially being decentralized back to the dental school, but what about IT support and finance? Because we are an enterprise and because we are a dental hospital, we have very unique needs around finance as well because of the revenue streams, because of the operating budget, the dispensables and the dental materials and equipment that we use. So even finance is very unique as well. So I'm asking your group to consider all of those service areas, not just use the example of HR. I'm sorry, Reader, I'm a delegate to the forum.
We've met before, but
Okay.
in December when you did a great job representing dental school.
But
So yeah.
I'm also the director of patient relations for the dental school. So when those patient grievances and situations occur, they come to me to minimize the university's liability. So
I can appreciate patient satisfaction, trust me, from my prior journey. And so to go back and just make sure I'm as clear as possible, I went down the HR as an example, but all 5 functional areas will go through the same evaluation of, okay, the activities that we've deemed central or shared would be FTE kind of catalogs that would say, hey, unit level, these are positions that could make sense for more of a shared central. And then the ones that are activities based at the unit level, that same due diligence. And then the nitty gritty detail, which you are aware of, that there are split positions that may be doing multiple activities. And so that due diligence of evaluating that is intended across all the functional areas, including IT.
Teresa?
Hi, Scott. Teresa Silsby from ITS. I do want to make a point, and I am probably a little bit, I guess, opinionated in this, and that Susie, who you were speaking to earlier, is one of my direct reports. But when you speak of someone who has university, for the breadth of university, not just in one specific area, she works in a position that supports HR, finance, payroll, and all employees for the university. I cannot think of anyone who has a wider breadth of boots on the ground experience. And so I would strongly encourage you to reconsider while you may have your reasons why you only took 2. And this means no disrespect to you or to any of the other folks that were selected. And again, I may be a little partial, but I just wanted to say that. Thank you for your time.
Always good to hear from you, Teresa. And we're aligned. I own that kind of misfire on the expectation of 2 of the 4. And we're going to revisit that, and I'll be back in touch. But I appreciate it as always.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it. Okay. So it is currently 11:17. We have 8 minutes, and I feel absolutely terrible. But Melanie Elliott from Sustainable Care, UNC Institute for the Environment, and Sustainable Carolina. I was going to give her 20 minutes. I feel really terrible about giving you 8 or actually 7 before the computer literally signs me out. So I appreciate your gracious offer to come back in March. I will put you earlier in the agenda to make sure that we have time for you, because I do want to give you an appropriate amount of time to present the information that you will be sharing. So thank you, Melanie. Real quickly, is there anything from the consent agenda, delegates, that you need to pull out? It is really just committee updates at this point. I do not have meeting minutes because life has been, well, lifing. Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as it stands?
Motion to approve the consent
Thank you,
agenda.
Ed.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ellie, for seconding. Do I have any objections to approving said consent agenda? Seeing none, it is approved. Well, old business, easy, I have none. New business, delegate elections, they are coming soon. It's hard to believe we are moving into election season, or maybe not so hard to believe, depending on the elections. Tiffany Carver and Natalia will be working with a couple of folks. If I have any delegates interested in helping, it's a very well-oiled machine. You do not have to make up anything new. Please reach out to Tiffany, Natalia, or me, and we will get you on that team. A sincere thanks to everyone that was here today. I think the conversation was incredibly valuable. I appreciated the courage that I saw in the chat, but also the courage that I have seen by the folks who spoke today related to Service First and other challenges that are going on here on campus for staff. I also appreciated you guys giving me a little extra time to speak at the beginning of the meeting. It really is an honor to serve as the employee forum and as the employee forum chair. And I look forward to continuing to work with each and every one of you to continue to make the magic happen. We do have meetings coming up. I would love to see you guys again at our next full body meeting on March 6th, 9 o'clock. Believe it will be right in this room again. There is another stack meeting coming up on March 4th. An executive committee meeting for the delegates that are part of the executive committee, on Tuesday, February 17th. That will be virtual only. And then the employee forum listening session for Service First has been rescheduled to next Tuesday at 11. The forecast looks lovely right now, subject to change. That will be 133 Rosenau Hall in the School of Public Health, primarily geared for staff in IT and communications, which are part of that phase 1. We really want to hear from you. That is not an open meeting. That is an in-person meeting only. We will host other virtual sessions in the future, but that is for our boots on the ground folks to provide us directly with feedback that we can then summarize and take to the Service First task forces and steering committee. Do I have anybody else here at the meeting with anything they need to share? Yes, Elizabeth. Up button.
Because this is an unusual kind of meeting, I just really want to thank people for their openness, even though it was very stressful. I think that we had a lot of forward motion of words today, and I also want to express gratitude for the people who are also feeling this in the pit of their stomach, because a lot of the things we say don't really get responded to in real time. But that being said, the Chancellor invited me to have a conversation with him to follow up on the concerns brought up during the housing discussion.
Wonderful.
So I would like to invite anybody who's interested in doing that as a delegate to reach out to me by email, and we will respond.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I will be reaching out to Todd after the meeting. I wasn't able to speak with him after his letter, but I will be reaching out to him directly. So thank you all. This is my kudos and highlights part. And I really don't want to necessarily single anybody out, but I really am grateful for those of you that have stayed for the 2.5 hours, to share your voices and make sure that we do continue to make the magic happen here at Carolina. Thank you. Do I have a motion? Oh, do I have a motion?
I have one more kudos. Kudos to facilities and grounds because
Yes,
during the
100%.
ice census, they were at the hotel in Carborough. They spent days and nights there getting up early in the morning and staying out. They were amazing.
It was amazing. Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Do I have any objections? Seeing none, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much. We saw the sign as we walked in, so it was very good. Thank you very much.
I didn't see it.
Oh,
So
well, there was a sign as we came into first. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you did see that. Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. I just want to say.
Mhm.
I mean, we're, no, my conference.
Should in about a minute.
In that role, I'm in
Oh, I'm gonna shut down the meeting in about a minute. So thank you very much. Okay, shutting the meeting down. Thank you all very much.